30 ships gone in less than a week. Iran's Navy, the force that had spent decades threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz, laying mines, seizing tankers, launching drone swarms at carrier groups, that force no longer exists as a functional military threat. Missile attacks on American and Allied targets dropped by 90%. The Iranian supreme leader is dead. 3 nuclear sites are rubble, and the United States Navy sits at the center of all of it. This is not a story about air power alone. The B-2 bombers get the headlines. The bunker busters make the dramatic footage. But if you want to understand why Iran could not fight back, why their missiles failed to find targets, why their ships burned at anchor before a single sailor could reach a battle station, you need to understand what the U.S. Navy brought to this fight. And more importantly, how it was all set up long before the first bomb dropped. Let's go back to where this really started. Not February 28, 2026, when Operation Epic Fury kicked off. Not even June 2025, when Operation Midnight Hammer struck Iran's nuclear facilities for the first time. The real story starts years earlier, in the quiet movements of carrier strike groups, in the silent repositioning of submarines, in the steady, deliberate buildup of American naval power in the waters surrounding one of the most heavily armed nations in the Middle East. Iran has always understood one thing about the United States military. When you see the carriers, you're looking at the threat they want you to see. What you don't see is what actually kills you. To understand what happened in the waters around Iran over the past 9 months, you have to understand how the U.S. Navy thinks about power projection. The Carrier Strike Group is the obvious instrument. 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, each one displacing over 100,000 tons, each one carrying 70 to 90 aircraft, each one surrounded by a constellation of cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and supply ships that together form the most capable maritime combat formation ever assembled. When the USS Abraham Lincoln arrived in the Arabian Sea, it brought with it enough firepower to defeat the entire Iranian Air Force several times over. When the USS Gerald R. Ford joined it, the combined air wing represented more combat sorties per day than Iran could realistically intercept, even under ideal conditions. And conditions were never going to be ideal for Iran. But the Carrier Strike Group is only part of the story. Because before the carriers were ever positioned, before the diplomatic deadlines were issued, before the world was watching the military buildup, something else was already in place. The submarines. Ohio-class guided missile submarines, the SSGN variant, are among the most consequential and most misunderstood weapons in the American arsenal. Originally designed as ballistic missile submarines during the Cold War, 4 of these boats were converted in the 2000s to carry up to 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles each. That is more offensive firepower in a single hull than most nations possess across their entire military. These submarines operate at depths and in acoustic profiles that make them effectively invisible to the sensor technologies Iran possessed. They can remain submerged for months. They do not need to surface to communicate. They do not need to reveal their position to receive targeting data. And when ordered to fire, they can empty their tubes in a matter of minutes, sending over 100 precision cruise missiles toward targets hundreds of miles inland before anyone on the surface even knows the boat is there. In June 2025, when Operation Midnight Hammer struck Iran's nuclear facilities, the role of submarine-launched Tomahawks was deliberately understated in initial reporting. The public narrative focused on the B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, 7 of them, flying 18 hours from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, armed with the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator. Those bombs, each weighing 30,000 pounds, designed to penetrate 200 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating, obliterated the underground enrichment facilities at Fordo and caused catastrophic damage at Natanz. The imagery was stunning. The engineering achievement was historic. Fordo was built inside a mountain specifically to survive this kind of attack. The mountain did not survive. But Fordo and Natanz were only 2 of the 3 targets. Isfahan, Iran's nuclear technology center, was struck by 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from a submarine operating somewhere beneath the Arabian Sea. Those missiles were sequenced with extraordinary precision. They were timed to impact Isfahan simultaneously with the B-2 strikes on Fordo and Natanz, meaning that Iranian air defense commanders were being overwhelmed from multiple directions at the exact same moment. There was no opportunity to reinforce one site by drawing assets from another. Every target was hit simultaneously. Every defensive calculation Iran had made was rendered useless by timing and by the simple fact that you cannot intercept a Tomahawk fired by a submarine you cannot find. The cost breakdown of Midnight Hammer tells its own story. 40 massive ordnance penetrator bombs with a price tag somewhere between $49 and $70 million. 7 B-2 stealth bombers, each costing over $2 billion to build, representing a combined sortie cost in the range of $31 to $37 million for the operation. And 24 Tomahawk missiles at roughly $1.5 million each, adding another $36 to $45 million to the total. The entire operation, the most consequential American military strike in a generation, cost somewhere between $2 and $2.25 billion. That is less than the cost of a single Ohio-class submarine. It is a fraction of what Iran spent over decades building the facilities that were destroyed in 2.5 hours. Iran's response to Midnight Hammer was the response of a regime that understood it had absorbed a blow it could not fully counter, but was not yet willing to acknowledge the full extent of its exposure. Supreme Leader Khamenei declared the strikes an act of aggression and promised retaliation. Iranian state media showed footage of what they claimed were functioning backup facilities. The IRGC announced that its missile forces remained intact and operational. And in the months that followed, American and Allied intelligence watched as Iran made genuine efforts to reconstitute elements of its nuclear research capability, establishing a new facility in Tehran that Western analysts named Minzadai. But here is what Iran could not reconstitute in those months. It could not rebuild the centrifuge halls at Fordo. It could not restore the uranium hexafluoride processing infrastructure at Isfahan. It could not undo the physical damage to Natanz. And it could not change the fundamental strategic reality that the United States had demonstrated in 2.5 hours, that no underground facility Iran could build was beyond the reach of American precision weapons. The mountain had not protected Fordow. No mountain would protect whatever came next. Through the second half of 2025 and into early 2026, the diplomatic track continued, even as the military posture tightened. On February 6, 2026, American and Iranian representatives held indirect nuclear talks in Muscat, Oman. These talks went nowhere meaningful. Iran's negotiating position remained unchanged. The regime wanted sanctions relief without verifiable dismantlement of its remaining nuclear capabilities. Washington's position was equally unchanged: irreversible, verifiable elimination of Iran's ability to produce weapons-grade nuclear material, destruction of its ballistic missile arsenal, and an end to financial and logistical support for proxy forces across the region. On January 28, before the Oman talks had even concluded, President Trump posted on Truth Social that a massive armada was heading toward Iran. The language was blunt, and the message was clear. The United States was positioning for action that would make Operation Midnight Hammer look restrained by comparison. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, which had been operating in the Mediterranean, began its transit toward the region. The Abraham Lincoln, already in the Arabian Sea, adjusted its operational posture. Destroyer squadrons, submarine tenders, logistics vessels, and replenishment ships began moving into supporting positions. The machine of American naval power was configuring itself for sustained combat operations. Iran's leadership had roughly 10 days after Trump's warning to reach a comprehensive agreement. That deadline passed without a deal. and at 1:15 in the morning on February 28, 2026, Eastern Standard Time, Operation Epic Fury began. The first actions were not kinetic. U.S. Cyber Command and U.S. Space Command initiated non-kinetic operations designed to degrade Iran's ability to communicate, coordinate, and conduct electronic warfare. This is a dimension of modern naval warfare that rarely gets discussed in the mainstream coverage, but is absolutely central to how the U.S. military fights. Before a single missile was fired, Iran's command and control networks were being actively disrupted. The radar systems that would track incoming strikes were being fed false data or blinded entirely. The communications links between IRGC leadership and field commanders were being intercepted, jammed, or severed. The space-based assets that Iran had spent years developing to monitor U.S. military movements were targeted specifically to deny Iran the situational awareness it would need to mount an effective defense. Then, at 9:45 in the morning Tehran time, the kinetic phase began. Over 100 aircraft launched simultaneously from land and sea. Fighters, tankers, airborne early warning aircraft, electronic attack platforms, strategic bombers flying from the continental United States, and unmanned platforms all formed a single, synchronized wave. CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper, speaking from the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, described it as the most complex and most precisely coordinated air and naval operation in a generation. The targets in the first wave of Epic Fury reflected the operation's four stated objectives, as outlined by Secretary Pete Hegseth: destroy Iran's offensive missile systems, destroy Iran's missile production infrastructure, destroy the Iranian Navy, and ensure Iran never acquires nuclear weapons. Each objective had its own target set, and each target set had been developed over months of intelligence collection, satellite surveillance, and analysis. The naval objective is the one that deserves the most detailed attention because it was executed with a speed and totality that even experienced military analysts found remarkable. Within the first 48 hours of Epic Fury, the Iranian Navy as a functioning combat force was effectively neutralized. More than 30 ships were sunk or destroyed. This included major surface combatants, fast attack craft of the type Iran had used for years to swarm and threaten commercial shipping, and the logistical vessels that sustained IRGC naval operations in the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. A key Iranian submarine was also sunk, eliminating one of the few undersea capabilities Tehran had developed. How was this accomplished so quickly? The answer lies in the months of preparation that preceded the operation. American submarines had been quietly tracking Iranian naval movements for an extended period before Epic Fury began. The locations of Iranian ships, their patrol patterns, their maintenance schedules, their defensive sensor coverage, all of this was known in detail before the first strike was authorized. When the order came, the targeting picture was complete. There was no time spent searching for ships. There was no uncertainty about locations. American submarines, surface ships, and aircraft struck Iranian naval targets from multiple vectors simultaneously, before the Iranians could scatter, before they could disperse to hiding positions along the coastline, before they could move into the shallow, mine-rich waters of the northern Persian Gulf, where they might have had some defensive advantage. The Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Pinckney, operating in the Fifth Fleet Area of Responsibility, fired Tomahawk land attack missiles that struck Iranian targets on February 28th, with the launch captured on video and released publicly by CENTCOM. The Pinckney is a surface combatant, visible, trackable, operating in waters Iran monitors continuously. And yet it fired its missiles without interference. That tells you everything you need to know about the state of Iranian air defense and anti-ship capability at the moment Epic Fury began. The cyber and electronic warfare operations in the opening minutes had degraded Iran's ability to coordinate a response to the degree that American surface ships could operate with relative freedom. The B-52 Stratofortress, a bomber that has participated in every major American military conflict since 1965, was employed in the first 100 hours of Epic Fury to strike Iranian ballistic missile storage and command and control facilities. Within 72 hours of the operation beginning, American bombers had struck nearly 200 targets across Iran, including targets in and around Tehran. B-2 bombers dropped dozens of 2,000-pound penetrator bombs against deeply buried ballistic missile launchers. The combination of B-52s for high-volume strike tasking and B-2s for hardened target defeat represents the full spectrum of American strategic air power, and both of these platforms depend heavily on the naval infrastructure that keeps them sustained, protected, and effective in a contested environment. Because here is what people consistently underestimate about carrier-based aviation in a conflict like this. The carriers are not just launching strikes, they are providing the airborne early warning, the electronic attack, the combat air patrol, and the tanker support that makes every other platform in the theater more effective. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, flying off the deck of the Abraham Lincoln, provides a radar picture that extends hundreds of miles in every direction, giving strike package controllers a real-time common operating picture that no land-based system can replicate with the same flexibility and persistence. The EA-18G Growler, the Navy's dedicated electronic attack aircraft, was suppressing Iranian radar and communications before the B-2S and B-52S arrived over their targets, ensuring that the multi-billion-dollar stealth bombers were operating in a degraded threat environment rather than against Iran's full defensive capability. This layered, integrated approach to combat is what separates the U.S. military from every other force on Earth. It is not any single platform or any single weapon that makes American sea power so decisive. It is the system. The carrier provides the aviation infrastructure. The submarine provides the invisible offensive punch and the undersea surveillance. The destroyer provides the Tomahawk strike capacity and the layered air defense that protects the entire formation. The electronic warfare aircraft suppresses the enemy's ability to see and communicate. The airborne early warning platform provides the battle management that ties it all together. Every element depends on every other element. And the result is a combat system that an adversary like Iran, with capable but ultimately limited and largely aging military technology, simply cannot match. The cost comparison between Midnight Hammer and Epic Fury also tells a strategic story. Midnight Hammer, a 2.5-hour operation against 3 nuclear sites, cost between $2 and $2.25 billion. The first 100 hours of Epic Fury cost an estimated $3.7 billion, according to analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. That increase reflects the broader scope of Epic Fury, the greater number of targets, the sustained operational tempo, the wider range of platforms employed. But consider what that money bought. 30-plus Iranian warships sunk. The Iranian Navy neutralized as a combat force. Missile attacks on American and Allied targets reduced by 90%. The Iranian supreme leader killed. Nuclear reconstitution facilities destroyed again. Ballistic missile storage sites and production facilities struck across the country. For a military operation that is reshaping the strategic landscape of the Middle East, these are not extraordinary costs. They are the price of decisions made by a regime that chose defiance over diplomacy for 47 years. The Iranian Navy's destruction carries strategic implications that extend well beyond the immediate conflict. For decades, Tehran's ability to credibly threaten to close the Strait of Hormuz was one of its primary instruments of regional leverage. 20% of the world's oil supply transits that strait. Any serious disruption to that flow would send global energy markets into crisis and give Iran enormous coercive power. American naval presence in the region was always designed in part to deter that threat and to ensure that if Iran ever attempted to close the strait by force, it would be reopened by force. The sinking of 30 Iranian ships in the opening days of Epic Fury was not just a military victory. It was the elimination of Iran's primary instrument for threatening global energy security. The Strait is no longer a card Iran can credibly play. The submarine threat to shipping, another tool Iran had developed through its small diesel-electric submarine fleet, has been addressed by the confirmed sinking of an Iranian submarine during the operation. The mine warfare capability, which Iran had invested in heavily as a relatively cheap and asymmetric way to contest American naval movements in the Persian Gulf, remains a concern, but one that is significantly degraded by the elimination of the surface and undersea platforms that would have deployed those mines in a conflict scenario. What comes next is genuinely uncertain. The Trump administration has offered shifting timelines for the duration of Epic Fury: 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. The operation continues to evolve based on Iranian responses and the pace of target neutralization. Iran's foreign minister has stated publicly that his country did not ask for a ceasefire and is not afraid of American ground forces. Whether that is genuine defiance or negotiating posture is something that analysts are actively debating. What is not debated is the military reality on the ground and at sea. Iran's combat power is diminishing. Its navy is gone. Its air defenses are degraded. Its missile forces are reduced in both quantity and in the infrastructure needed to sustain them. And the United States Navy continues to hold the strategic position from which it can apply pressure indefinitely. The USS Abraham Lincoln sits in the Arabian Sea. The USS Gerald R. Ford operates in supporting waters. Between them, their combined air wings represent more combat power than most countries possess in their entire military. The submarines that operate with those strike groups are invisible to anything Iran still has that can search for them. The Arleigh Burke destroyers that ring the carriers carry hundreds of missiles and the most capable radar systems ever put to sea. And behind all of them, the logistics chain of fleet replenishment ships, submarine tenders, and forward operating infrastructure ensures that this force can maintain its operational tempo for as long as the mission requires. This is what American sea power looks like when it is fully committed. Not a demonstration, not a signaling exercise. The real thing, every system that the Navy has built, tested, refined, and deployed over the past 3 decades, brought to bear against an adversary that had spent those same 3 decades preparing to resist it. The Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. The nuclear program that Iran spent billions of dollars and decades of scientific effort building has been physically destroyed twice. The missile arsenal that was supposed to deter American action has been degraded to the point where attack rates have fallen by 90%. And the supreme leader who held power for 35 years and who made every major decision that brought Iran to this moment is dead. None of that happened because of one weapon or one operation. It happened because the United States Navy and its joint partners built a system of systems, tested it, maintained it, crewed it with professionals who trained their entire careers for exactly this kind of mission, and positioned it with strategic patience over months and years before the first shot was fired. That is the lesson of Operation Epic Fury that will be studied in every professional military school on Earth for the next generation. Not the specific weapons, not the specific targets, the system, the patience, the integration, and the invisible submarines that were already in position long before the world knew a war was coming. If you want to understand what comes next in this conflict, how the U.S. Navy will maintain pressure, what Iran's remaining options actually are, and what the long-term strategic implications of this operation mean for China's calculations in the Pacific, subscribe to Navy Power Decoded. Every week we go deeper than the headlines. Every video is built on analysis, not commentary. The war in the Middle East is not over, but the naval chapter of it has already been decided.